we're meeting at a time of real despair, because we just found that in news headlines, you see that there's a barbarism unleashed, which shows no signs of relenting anytime in the future. We're going to be subject to this torture for many more days, and we just completely going to be in the dark to really know when this is going to end. There's no light visible anywhere in that tower that we're in at this point. If you look at the past, Achin mentioned this, this is the fourth significant military assault on Gaza in the last 15 years. There was Operation Cast-Lead in 2008 to 2009. They launched it just after the US election and just before the new president took office. I think their intent was to show very clearly that we will set the rules ourselves, because there was a hint from Washington, D.C. that there might be a change from the hard right policies of the Bush administration. There might be a change when the new administration, Barack Obama, comes in. And he learned his lesson. He learned through his 8 years in office not to challenge Israel's right to write its own rules for the people that it governs. And if you look at the casualty figures there, it goes like this. And this is very important to understand the logic of Israeli militarism. Operation Cast-Lead claimed 1,400 Palestinian lives, including 300 children, all in Gaza, all in that smaller territory that you see them. You see on the map. It's so insignificant you can easily miss it on the map, right? And Israeli civilians killed were 3 from rocket fires from Gaza into what's called into the 1948 borders of Israel, because say Israel, Palestine, and so on is such an indeterminate thing, because they just have not defined their borders. I mean, there has to be some sense of and we'll come to which of the cities that are facing the brunt of this attack from Gaza in a little while. So that's the proportionality there. In all 9 Israelis casualties, that's in terms of deaths, and 1,400 Palestinians. When there was Operation Protective Edge, 2,000 Palestinian deaths. This is 2014, July to August, 51-day war. 2,000 Palestinian deaths, including 400 children. Injuries to scores of civilians. And 6 Israeli civilians and 6 Israeli soldiers killed. So, in the law of war, there's something called the International Humanitarian Law, IHL. You can look up your studies primers to get a sense of what they say. Broadly stemming from the Geneva Conventions, there are certain doctrines that are laid down. There are certain doctrines of non-harm to non-combatant populations, right? You cannot attack with deliberate intent a non-combatant population. You cannot attack their means of subsistence, right? Denial of food, water, fuel, and so on. That's a war crime. And also doctrine of proportionality, right? That any military action taken has to be proportionate in terms of the intended effects, right? And it has to be, in some way, proportionate to the impact that you've suffered, right? So if this is the ratio that you've got here so far in 3 previous conflicts in Gaza over the last 15 years, in terms of the ratio of people killed, the proportion, what would be the point at which Israel would stop its military offensive? They already suffered 1,200 casualties. So if you consider that ratio of, in one case 300, in the other case it's like of 30. The intent to cause harm to Palestine is so gross, I mean, it's so severe that it's difficult to contemplate. Where will they stop this offense, right? So today we have news that the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has landed in, always about the land in Israel. And one of his talking points would be to create a humanitarian corridor for evacuating civilians from Gaza, right? Now, the good intent to minimize human suffering, it also could be to provide easier targeting for Israel. When they move their ground forces into Gaza, they have to worry less about civilians non-combatants being killed, and they can continue this indiscriminate bombing from ground. through their ground forces, right? So, and second question, Netanyahu, before he launched his attack on the very first day, on October 7th, said, people in Gaza, please leave, because the whole place is going to be a kind of killing field. Where can they leave to? The exits to Egypt are sealed. The exits to Gaza have been, to Israel have been recaptured by the Israeli army. Only place they can go to is the sea, right? That's the effective kind of in that small territory of a few square miles. There's just no place to hide. So, and if you've seen the pictures that have come through the news channels, you can see the extent of the devastation. There's been no devastation on this scale in any war context since the carpet bombing of the incendiary bombing of Japan in World War II, and which was finally capped off with the nuclear bombing at Nagasaki and Hiroshima, right? So that is the logic of the situation here. Now, if you look at the background to this, there are of course international watchdog bodies. There have been reports filed by non-governmental organizations and also by intergovernmental organizations. If you look at the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, they've come up with a series of reports over the years, and their findings are very clear. Now, here's, for instance, is an extract from the report of the UN Special Rapporteur from 2019. The land, sea, and air blockade imposed on Gaza has now entered its 12th year, severely restricting imports and exports, the movement of people into and out of Gaza, and access to adequate healthcare, education, and livelihoods, including agricultural land and fishing. Israel has considerably tightened its restrictions on the movement of humanitarian staff since 2018, citing security concerns. The blockade of Gaza is a denial of basic human rights and amounts to collective punishment. Now, this is just an illustrative kind of extract from one of many, many reports. Now, if you look at Human Rights Watch reports or Amnesty, you'll find many more such deep analysis of what this whole thing means. Now, the Israeli argument here, if you've been following the news channels, you would have seen one of the official spokesperson for the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, saying that all laws of war are being followed. That we have rigorously. We are an army with a conscience. We are following all laws of war rigorously and religiously, scrupulously. How they have, how we can make that claim is just a preposterous claim. No, it's just impossible to sort out how he can possibly make the claim. Now, an old argument that Israel has repeatedly made in the past is that they will not honor the Geneva Conventions in the occupied territories because there was no sovereign power there prior to their occupation, right? If you look at the background, these territories remained one part of it. Gaza was under Egyptian control after 1948, till they lost in 1967 in the Six-Day War. And the West Bank was under Jordania. Ambiguous in terms of the sovereign kind of power, right? They never claimed that these were part of their sovereign territory, because they always claimed that when Palestine is liberated, these would be part of the future state of Palestine, right? That was the official stand of both these governments. So they had no sovereignty claims of these territories. And after that, it became Israeli occupied territory. But it's not as if there has been a previous sovereign. It's not as if it's a state of war. So there is no question of honoring the Geneva Conventions. But this point here is that the modern political kind of theories of sovereignty don't assign sovereignty to states. Sovereignty is assigned to the people. The people who live in these territories are sovereign, have a sovereign power, right? And this has a bearing also on the other argument that they deploy, which is that nobody has recognized Israel's right to exist. Now that's an absolute lie, because PLO recognized Israel in 1993, entered into negotiations, got nothing out of it, right? And Hamas has also recognized Israel's existence within the 2017 borders, right? Within the 1948 borders, right? In 2017, they recognized Israel's right to exist within. Okay, these things are sometimes, sometimes you miss some of the nuances or complexities. What they said is that we are prepared to accept a two-state solution within the 1967 borders. Borders prevailing between 1948 and 1967, right? Which means that they are happy to accept a Palestinian state in Gaza and the West Bank, right? So effectively, it's a recognition of Israel. So there is no, they will not say that we recognize Israel because they cannot recognize a state that's built upon the denial of their existence, right? What is the foundational slogan of Israel? The foundational slogan of Israel is that this is a land without a people, or a people without a land, right? People without a land being the Jewish people of Europe have a right to return to their God-given promised land after millennia of exile. And there's nobody there. There's it's just a vast open territory waiting for us to make it bloom again, right? So this is the foundational slogan, and what they confronted in 1948 was the reality that there were 700,000 refugees created, and there are large numbers who are still there, who are refusing to leave Palestine. So Ben Gurion, the founding prime minister, at some point ordered a halt to the war, to the military operations, and said, let's stop it here. Going beyond this would involve getting a very recalcitrant Palestinian population into our state, and it will be impossible to control that situation, right? So West Bank and Gaza were deliberately left out of that phase of the military operations. And after 1967, when these two territories came into under Israeli control, what has been the biggest crisis that they have faced? The biggest crisis that they have faced is an existential crisis. Because they want to be both a Jewish state and they want to claim a democratic status, right? When you have 6 million people of the Jewish faith, keeping, we have no precise estimate, but it's widely believed to be about 6 million people in the Gaza and West Bank put together, 5.5 or thereabouts, plus about 1 million Palestinians within the 1967 borders of Israel, right? So 6.5 million is the Palestinian population between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. What's the Jewish population in this stretch of land? It's about the same, right? So is this a Jewish state? Can it claim to be a Jewish state? If it wants to be a Jewish state, can it also be a democratic state? Can it afford to give equal rights to those 6.5 million people? It's just impossible to reconcile this conundrum. So right from the foundation of Israel, if you look at don't listen to what David Ben Gurion and so on. He speaks about making the desert bloom, that the children, the sons of Abraham will prosper together, all those things. He says that at one level. At another level, when he speaks of Hebrew, he says break their bones, throw them out, don't let them come back. 1949, under Resolution 194 of the Security Council, the right of the refugees to return was made integral to the recognition of Israel as a nation state. 1948, December, right? But Ben Gurion, the lofty rhetoric aside, giving clear instructions, nobody's going to come back. And there's the other discourse which is set in motion, which says that we are left with this bit of a nuisance. There are these 1 million people within our territory. The number has gone up over the years. Obviously, it was much lower in the 50s. What do we do about that? So there's an active school of thought there which talks about expulsion, about transfer. It's not as if they want to, transfer is the more polite way of saying it. So South America, where do we sit there? South America, vast open continent, sparsely populated, yeah, maybe we can send them there, maybe we can send them somewhere else, maybe other Arab states will absorb them. All these kinds of debates are going up over the years. And 1967, they are confronted with a demographic problem on an altogether different scale. Because now they have virtually an equal number of Palestinians within their territory. How do they deal with that situation? So this becomes the key kind of identity crisis of the Zionist state. And in 2018, after long debate, they passed a law which says that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. And the right to self-determination within the territory of Israel belongs exclusively to the Jewish people. Hebrew is the national language of Israel. Arabic will have a special status, but Hebrew is the national language of Israel. So effectively, they have created two classes of citizens, right? Because there is no specific recognition of minority rights, right? And even the people with Israeli citizenship don't enjoy anything like the rights of, if you want to get a building permit, you don't get it. If you're a resident of East Jerusalem, you don't get it because Israel has long-term plans of possessing your territory and declaring it the eternal capital of Jewish people, right? Which they already done, and which of course Donald Trump, when he was US president, recognized, right? So there's already a situation of significantly differentiated rights within the borders of 1967 Israel, and that's become much more accentuated. But what happened with the Gaza and the people of West Bank? Gaza, of course, they kind of gave up in 2003, was it? Ariel Sharon withdrew from Gaza, right? 2003 or 2005, right? Ariel Sharon, one of their most infamous military commanders, who was head of the Southern Command in the 1950s, or he was a colonel, and he was notorious for his raids on Palestinian villages and the kind of extermination policies that he practiced. Later, as a general, he became head of the Israel Defense Forces Southern Command, right? So he had direct oversight over Gaza. And despite 8,000 settlers there, he said, "This is ungovernable. We can't deal with this. We're going to dismantle settlements." So he took that political risk. Netanyahu, who was also in the government at that time, he was also a Likud member, although he was not a minister, opposed that plan, right? You can look at the kind of toxic kind of competition that goes on there, where the only integrative force is how best to screw the Palestinians, right? Even a pragmatic plan that Sharon had, that it's an ungovernable territory, let's get out of there. Let's just build walls around it and police it from the air and sea, and that's good enough for us, right? If you put our people in there, they're going to be at risk, so there's no point running that risk. It's pretty useless territory anyway. But the kind of toxic political competition there ensured that Netanyahu opposed it tooth and nail. But finally, of course, Ariel Sharon went into the next world, and then Netanyahu regained control over the Likud and kind of became prime minister. He's now the longest serving prime minister in Israeli history. He just exceeded David Ben-Gurion's record a few months back. So there is still no clarity, and from whatever I hear, whoever goes to Israel and goes around there, talks to people, just don't want to talk about it. They're just hoping that the problem will disappear. And they're willing to let the military option run its course, because they say that that's one possible way of resolving this in the long term, because otherwise we can't sustain ourselves as a Jewish state, right? So, despite all this, over the years, Israel has gained a certain measure of respectability globally, And in fact, Netanyahu prides himself on having opened diplomatic relations with more states than any of his predecessors. Right? And of course, the most dramatic such development was the Abraham Accords, which he concluded in 2018, I think, with US blessings and sponsorship. They established diplomatic relations with Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. And then Sudan later followed, and Morocco also followed. Right? And what's most evident about these deals is, of course, it's a transactional thing. When Morocco recognized Israel and established diplomatic relations, Israel and the US also recognized Morocco's control over the Western Sahara. There has been a long running liberation war going on. It's been going on for years and years, decades maybe. It's called the Sahara African Democratic Sahel. So they recognized Morocco's control over there. Sudan got some kind of a crumb from the table. Now, of course, Sudan is now kind of disintegrating under civil war, so nobody knows whether it's going to do them any good. Bahrain and United Arab Emirates, what is in it for them? They're both extremely wealthy oil emirates. They're both governed by monarchical systems. So in a sense, they're immune to what the people think and say, right? But what people of Qatar had commercial ties with Israel till 2008. They broke it off at the time of Operation Taskway. Qatar hosted the World Cup last year, and Israelis went there expecting a warm reception. Abraham called and all that it was concluded. What they met was a completely frosty kind of reception. And the Emirates was expected to invest very heavily in Israel and also be host to a wave of Israeli tourists. It's happened one way. There has been a large movement of Israeli tourists into the Emirates, but not vice versa. One of the sheikhs of Abu Dhabi, from the ruling family, the Al Nahyan family, offered to invest a significant sum of money in a football club in Israel. It's called Beitar Jerusalem. Beitar Jerusalem is one of the most infamous clubs, perhaps in the world, because it's integrally tied to the growth of extreme Zionism. There was a Rabbi in the 1920s, Rabbi, the name that starts with J, and all these extreme politicians are his followers. So this club was associated with that brand of extreme right-wing Zionism. And every one of its matches, it's played to accompaniment of the chorus of shouts like death to the Arabs and so on. And it's the only club in Israel that's never had a single Arab player through its entire history. So this Sheikh of Abu Dhabi offered to invest money in that, and with the expectation that he could change the culture of the club. But they said no. For them, holding on to that culture, obviously. Now, the official reason they gave is that there's some doubts about the legitimacy of this money. Huh? How can you doubt the legitimacy of the money of the Abu Dhabi Sheikh? I mean, he makes his money from oil. The whole world knows this. Come on. What's the problem there? The club wants to hold on to its culture. They don't want that culture to change. It's very, very integral to the way Israel and the Israeli politics is structured today. So where does Netanyahu's cockiness come from? He spoke in the United Nations just last month, on the 22nd of September, and some of what he said, he said that there are a large number of Arab states willing to talk and do business with Israel. Palestinians are just 2% of the Arab world, and when they saw that most of the Arab world has reconciled itself with the Jewish state, they too will be more likely to abandon the fantasy of destroying Israel and finally embrace a path of genuine peace with it. Right? The Abraham Accords were a pivot of history, but I believe that we are at the cusp of an even more dramatic breakthrough, a historic peace deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And he's referring here to the G20 summit that was held here in Delhi. 2 weeks ago, we saw another blessing already in sight. At the G20 conference, President Biden and Prime Minister Modi and European and Arab leaders announced plans for a visionary corridor that will stretch across the Arabian Peninsula and Israel. It will connect India to Europe with maritime links, rail links, energy pipelines, and fiber optics. Right? So that's the kind of expectation here. Now, of course, with the events in Gaza, with the events in Gaza, you've had Saudi Arabia breaking off negotiations on diplomatic recognition, mutual recognition. But otherwise, the kind of global outrage you've seen at the government level has not been significant. But what is the reason? The reason is that for the last 20 years, not the entire reason, there's something to do with American kind of global hegemony and all that also. That's another part of the narrative, which is also very important. You need to factor that also in. But a very important part of the reason why Israel is able to get along in a spirit of bonhomie with various other governments is that it set itself up as a kind of one-stop shop for military and surveillance technology. Right? We heard about that Pegasus software which India had imported from Israel after Mr. Modi's last visit there in 2019. How it was deployed for surveillance of journalists and civil rights activists and even political opposition leaders. And that's only the tip of the iceberg. There's a much, much deeper relationship between India and Israel at the military and intelligence than this revealed. And of course, we also know that when this matter went to the Supreme Court, despite the serious concern of the bench, they got nowhere. They got nowhere because the government just refused to reveal any details, right? Even though it involved surveillance of the citizens of this country. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. It's very, very much more. In fact, Achin was kind enough to give me a book on the subject recently, written by, what's the name of the author? Assad, which speaks about this exact thing. It's about the deepening defense ties between India and Israel. And that's a common factor to all regimes everywhere in the world. Whenever there are insecure regimes, corrupt regimes, which have reason to be fearful and suspicious of its citizens, and they may have the veneer of democracy, but that doesn't mean that they're prepared to deal with citizens on a level of equality and equal rights and all that. They might have a veneer of democracy. It might be a monarchical regime like in Emirates or Qatar or some democratic regime, one that wears the clothes of democracy, as in India, but still there is a common interest in securing these technologies from Israel. Another, of course, is I think I might as well deal with that question before closing. Is the global kind of dominance of the United States? Now, we spoke about what strategies are available to the rest of the world, into the past years, to deal with this the outrage of occupation and colonization in Palestine. BDS is one option which has shown some serious promise. What about disinvestment and sanctions of Israel, right? And it picked up a lot of momentum, and enough momentum to have the Israeli government launch its own kind of public diplomacy program called Hasbah. They have a public diplomacy program through social media and through inducements to mainstream media to promote the Israeli cause. But it's obviously not enough. It's not enough. Now there are actual moves afoot to criminalize the calls for the BDS campaign in some of the Western countries. Germany has already criminalized it. USA is debating that, although they kind of take great pride in their free speech traditions, they actually actively considering criminalizing the BDS campaign. The UK is contemplating, this is today's news headlines, contemplating the singing of the Palestinian national anthem and the display of Palestinian flags as criminal offenses, right? Defense of terrorism, giving comfort to terrorism. No, those kind of clauses exist in some legal systems. We can invoke them in this particular case. So, BDS has potential. which was one earlier instance when BDS worked. A ready example springs to mind, which is South Africa, right? South Africa, the global community mobilized strongly to declare a boycott of South Africa against the resistance by UK and USA, right? Reagan was in power in the USA. He resisted as far as he could, finally relented because of the power of the Congressional Black Caucus in the United States. UK also resisted, but when US went away, they were left pretty powerless. In 1994, Nelson Mandela was released from 25 years, 30 years in prison, and then you had the democratic transition, right? Is there a possibility of a similar thing happening here? Yes, if BDS manages to pick up further momentum despite the hurdles that I anticipated. But what is the other big problem now is that 1994, the USA was triumphant, it was dominant, because it had just, the Soviet Union collapsed and capitalism had just emerged as the only system that works, and it was a globally dominant force, right? And it could say what it wanted, get what it wanted. Today, it's not that easy. The USA now feels threatened in terms of its global hegemony as never before. As never, at least in the last 30 years, right? China, Iran, they keep inventing threats everywhere. They see a threat on every chair, right? So they are unlikely to let go of this very important strategic ally that they have in West Asia. Israel is their key ally in West Asia. They're not going to let this ally go, that easily, the way that South Africa was let go. So, what other option is there? The only other option I can see, and Achin alluded to it, is that the neighboring Arab states go through a genuine democratic transition. We saw briefly in Egypt when there was a popularly elected government. There were changes afoot in that region, changes that were significant enough to induce the Egyptian military to seize back control with the blessings of the United States. And there's a rhetoric that the West often indulges in, which is that Israel is the only democracy in the region, which is, of course, entirely spurious. There is also another related theme which they keep hammering upon all the time, which is that if you have democracy in the Arab world, you're not going to have any trouble with Israel. You'll have no trouble at all getting on with Israel, right? Completely untrue. When you have democratic transition, that's precisely when the people of the Arab world are going to say that we're not going to have any kind of engagement with this racist apartheid state, right? So these are remote possibilities, but of course, times are dire, times are desperate, and you always have to clutch at these kind of straws. And I believe, I believe in the long term that being an optimist never does you any harm, right? There will be disappointments along the way, multiple disappointments along the way, but finally you got to trust in that ultimate victory of justice. Thank you.